Hey y'all, in this recipe we're going to be making Josefina's Bizcochitos, and these are little cookies and they have cinnamon and sugar on top of them and are a little bit spicy because they've got anise seed in them and they taste really good. And these recipes are from a cookbook that is put out by American Girl. So the first thing we're going to do in this recipe is we're going to take 1/4 cup of sugar and add some cinnamon to it, and this is going to go on top of the cookies at the end. And you want to mix that up with a little tiny whisk, or you can use a fork if you don't have a whisk. The next step we're going to do is you're going to take a cup of shortening or lard, and shortening is vegetable fat and lard is animal fat. And Josefina would have most likely used lard because that would have been what was available. And you're going to take that and work it around the sides of the bowl, and this is to get it soft and work it so that the sugar will work into it a little bit better in the next step. So you just want to press that around the sides of the bowl and mix it up and soften it up as best you can. So the next step is going to be to slowly add in 1/2 cup of sugar, and you're going to mix that in, and as you're slowly adding it in, you're going to press and work that against the side of the bowl, and you're going to keep on mixing that until you don't feel the grittiness of the sugar against the side of the bowl. And while we're doing this, we are going to talk a little bit about Josefina, and Josefina is an American girl from New Mexico, and at the time that Josefina was around, this was around 1824, Josefina would have been a Mexican citizen because in 1824, New Mexico was a part of Mexico. And it wasn't until 1858 that it became a part of the United States. And at that time, when Josefina was an adult, she would have been able to become an American citizen. So during this time period and even to today, Mexican culture is a pivotal part of New Mexican culture. So Bizcochitos are a cookie that was pretty much made during special occasions because any sweet thing during that time period for any culture would have been more of a special occasion. You didn't really have sweet stuff every day. So that's something that's important to remember. These cookies were mentioned as a part of the Christmas celebration and Josefina's birthday celebration. So they're something that was really special to have. So these cookies are made using what's called the creaming method, and that's what this with the sugar and the shortening is. And you can also do this with butter or any solid fat, but you're just mixing this together until it gets light and fluffy, and then trying to get that to where all of the sugar is dissolved and worked in. And it's going to take a little while, so if you're having a hard time mixing this up, you can use a hand mixer, but keep in mind that Josefina would not have had that option because electricity was not a thing then. So the next step is going to be to add in an egg, and we're also going to put in the flavorings that we have for this recipe now. So we're going to put in some anise seed, which is a little bit spicy, and we're also going to put in some vanilla, which is going to make this taste really good. And the reason we're putting this in now is so that it mixes up really well in our wet ingredients before we add our dry ingredients in. It's a little bit easier to mix the wet ingredients than it is the dry ingredients. So after that, you're going to sift together your dry ingredients, and we're not sifting this to break up the flour or anything, we're just sifting it to mix together your dry ingredients. So we're going to put in there 3 cups of flour, 1 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I know it seems strange to put salt in a cookie, but that salt is going to help it just taste a little bit better, and you want to sift it until all of that goes through. Then you're going to take those dry ingredients and mix them into your wet ingredients with a fork until they kind of get to where all of the dry ingredients and wet ingredients look kind of crumbly. And then it's going to be fun because you can work with your hands after this to get it mixed together into one big dough. So Josefina was a really cool American girl to learn about because Josefina is a Mexican American, and she lives with her 2 sisters and her father. Her mother passed away before the books began. She lives on a farm, and she lives in a really neat house that has like a little courtyard in the middle of it. They have goats. One of the goats she has like a little bit of a disagreement with because it eats all of her flowers and is kind of mean. but also has a baby goat later on that she gets to raise. So now you see me dividing that dough into 3 sections. And once you get that dough divided into 3 sections, we're going to put some flour down on your board so that we can roll this out. And this is just going to keep your dough from sticking to the board. And then you take one of your dough sections and we're going to press it out a little bit so that it's able to be rolled out a little bit easier. And then you put a little bit of flour on top of that to keep your rolling pin from sticking to it. And then you take your rolling pin, I'm using a marble one because it's nice and heavy and makes it a little bit easier to roll, and you're going to roll this out until it's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and you want to keep it nice and even so all your cookies are the same size and they bake evenly. So during the books, Josefina has an aunt that comes and stays with them, and her name is Tia Dolores, and Tia Dolores is very smart and she's very kind, and she teaches them how to read because Josefina is 9 years old and she doesn't know how to read when the books start. So it's really neat that she's able to learn how to read, and she also learns how to play the piano. And her father likes to play the violin, which is really interesting, and so she's able to watch that happen. There's all sorts of interesting celebrations that happen. The Bizcochitos get served with a Christmas celebration where they go from house to house for 9 nights leading up to Christmas, where they're simulating Mary and Joseph going from house to house and saying, and they tell them that there's no room at the end until they get to the last house, and at the last house there's a big celebration. So there's all sorts of really cool celebrations and parties that happen within this. So after you've rolled it out, you can see that we're cutting out stars. The original recipe says it makes a lot more cookies than we're able to make. The cookies probably were a lot smaller during Josefina's time because they were not used to having as much sugar as we're used to having. A lot of times we're kind of used to having some sweet treats almost every day, but during Josefina's time, these would have been very, very special occasion type things, and they would have been much smaller than the cookies that we're used to having now. So I didn't have a little tiny cookie cutter for this, and so my cookies are much larger than Josefina's would have been. So once you finish cutting out what you can out of that little bit of dough, you're going to take all your scraps and press them together as best you can. And then once you get them pressed together and you can get them to kind of go back into a ball of dough, you can roll that out again and make more cookies out of it. You don't want to do this more than twice because every time you do this, the cookies are going to get a little bit tougher and harder to chew. But that's what you're going to do as you keep on going throughout this process of rolling your cookies out. So throughout the books, it talks a lot about the different things that Josefina and her sisters like to do. The thing that they like the most seemed to be music, but the really interesting thing is that whenever they had parties, Josefina and her younger sister were not allowed to dance because they weren't old enough, so they weren't allowed to dance at parties. The other thing that they liked to do was they liked to do embroidery. Their mother was very good at it, and one of Josefina's sisters was much better at it than the others were. The other thing, they also ended up weaving a lot of blankets during the course of the book, and that wasn't something that they necessarily enjoyed a whole lot, but even though Josefina was 9, it was her responsibility to help out the family with whatever they needed. And during the course of the books, they lost a whole lot of sheep in a flood. And so when that happened, they weaved a whole lot of blankets out of the wool that they had, and Josefina was able to help her family earn money to purchase more sheep because that had happened to her family. So as a 9-year-old, she had to help her family out with something that happened. So that's something that a lot of people may not be used to. You might do some chores at your house, like making your bed or maybe cleaning your bathroom or that kind of thing, but there was a lot more work that had to happen on a farm during that time period. But also they didn't have things to do like watching TV or watching YouTube. And they didn't have very many toys either. Josefina was waiting for a long time because her older sisters had a doll that had been passed down from her mother, from her oldest sister to her middle 2 sisters, and she had to wait until her next oldest sister gave it to her before she even had a doll. And so if you think about how many toys that a lot of kids have now, thinking about only having one doll as a child, it's a much different life than we're used to now. So we've gotten used to having a lot more things than they had during that time period. So if you think about going into your room and looking at the things that you have, which would be your favorite thing to keep if you could only have one type of toy going forward? So we are still cutting out our cookies, and then after all your cookies are cut out, what you're going to do is take that cinnamon sugar and you're going to sprinkle the cookies with cinnamon sugar as you go through. And that's going to make a little crunchy topping on top that makes them taste really, really good and a little bit more sweet. One of Josefina's best friends was actually lived in a pueblo, so she was Native American, so that was really neat too. So there I am sprinkling some sugar, some cinnamon sugar on top of the cookies. So don't forget to do that so your cookies end up tasting really nice. So I'm taking the last little bit of my re-rolls and adding a little bit of water to them because they're a little bit dried out. And then you just roll out the rest and you're good to go. When you bake these, you're going to bake them at 375 degrees and make sure you have an adult help you put them in the oven. You should not be putting those in the oven by yourself, so the adult should help you out with that. And you bake them for about 8 to 10 minutes until they get brown and crispy on the edges. And this is my one last cookie. And we're going to get ready to put these in the oven. So as you can see, these cookies are amazing. They taste really, really good, and I hope you can try these out with your family and learn some more about Mexican culture and American culture. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you want to learn more about American history, we've got some other videos that you guys can watch on this channel.